Right. So, welcome everyone. We are here today to talk about reflections on race in the workplace. A loaded topic. We only have an hour. We have a lot to get through today, but let's get started. So, really briefly, for anyone who's unfamiliar with myself, Inclusion Geeks, or if you haven't been to one of our webinars in a while, my name is Felicia. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm one of the partners at Inclusion Geeks. Our mission is to help workplaces work for everyone. And as I mentioned earlier, I am based on the East Coast. I am in Western Massachusetts on the edge of the Berkshires. It is very cold and icy here. We may be getting more snow tonight. I don't really know what's happening, but we are locked in. So for anyone who's in warmer weather, please send those good warm vibes our way. I am located presently on the land that is the traditional homelands of the Nipmuc, Pocumtuck, and Nonotuck peoples. We'll get into more about myself and everything else today, but really briefly, just want to say that once again, if you're here and you've engaged with us before, let us know in the chat. If this is your first time here as well, you can also feel free to let us know in the chat. But we have a lot of ways to engage with each other during our webinar for today. Here's a couple ways that you can engage. So I love using the chat. We have folks from the team who are on the chat as well. So if I'm not able to immediately answer any questions or thoughts that you might share, we have team members who can do that on the back end. So share any questions, comments, thoughts in chat publicly or privately. We will have some polls, which we're going to be using a tool called Slido. And so I'll talk us through that once we get to that point. We also will have some time at the end for some dedicated Q&A. So if you have questions along the way, pop those in the chat, but we'll also have some time where you can actually share and come off mute if you so choose to do so. And just as a final note, for those of you who know me, I am partially deaf and I love closed captions because they really help me. They may or may not help you. So we have that functionality available for today. If it's not something that you need, you can go ahead and turn off that CC closed caption button on your end. But if it's something that's helpful for you, please feel free to go ahead and enable those. All right, so we are going to get into it. So first things first, I want to just start with a couple declarations. So, the topic for today is race in the workplace and specifically the experience of Black employees in the workplace. I want to just start off by saying I am not Black. I am biracial, but my identities are not Black. I am half white and half Indian. And so I want to be really clear that when I'm talking about our topics today, I'm not speaking for Black employees. I'm speaking in support, and I have a lot of tips and strategies and ways to think about how we can understand this experience, but I myself do not have that lived experience. The words and the time that we have, which is one quick hour today, are not going to be enough to truly describe the totality and get into all of the various aspects of what different experiences are or experiences of every single Black professional out there. And we're not going to be able to fix all of our problems in 1 hour. There's a lot of issues going on in the world today, and this is merely a way for us to start coming together and thinking through some of these concerns, some of these aspects, and how we can come together around this topic. So, with that in mind, I want you to give yourself permission to go deeper. We will go through a lot today, but there's going to be more to get into. And so, I'm not going to be able to talk about everything. I don't believe in perfection. And so, there is going to be more for you to think through after we're done today. And I hope that you are able to continue your own learning journey. I don't intend, as I said, to be perfect because I don't believe in that concept. I also don't intend to know everything because I'm a simple human being, but I know a fair amount. And that's what my intentions are for today, to share what I know and what I've learned and experienced in my own personal and professional life. I will take accountability for my impact, and I invite you all to do the same. And I'm also going to pace myself and take care of myself during this hour, and I hope that you can do that as well for yourself. So, those are a couple quick declarations that I like to start off with. So, with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about the current landscape. Now, this is a big thing to get into here, and we want to be talking specifically for our topic today, which is reflections on race in the workplace in this, the year of our Lord 2025. Why does this matter? Does it still matter? I think it definitely does still matter very much, but I also want to acknowledge that no matter what your personal beliefs are or your political views or where you're located in the country, whether you're in the United States or outside of the United States, There is a lot going on right now. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But before we go any further, I just want to say happy Black History Month because February is a month where we celebrate a lot of different things, one of them being Black history. And Black history is still very much important and relevant for us to name even in today's times. Now, really quickly, just in case anyone's not familiar with some of the history behind Black History Month, these observances are really, I think, critical for just reflecting on the authentic and real lived story and history of our country, especially here in the United States. And so this month has been observed in various different forms and formats since 1926 or so. There was an author named Carter G. Woodson who led a national campaign to celebrate the achievement of Black Americans. He wanted to make sure that school children in particular were exposed to honest, authentic Black history, especially stories that went beyond simple racist tropes or just defaulting to accounts of slavery. So, President Ford officially recognized February as Black History Month in 1976. And since then, we have been recognizing the importance of this observance during this month of February. So I want to note that Black History Month, especially in this year, 2025, is a month both of observance and also of resistance. And I think that this feels even more pertinent today because Black History Month has taken on a new significance as our new president, Donald Trump, is taking actions to end DEI efforts, dismantle programs that are going to be benefiting millions, including Black Americans. We're also seeing that there's guidance that's being put out there that is declaring identity months are dead. And my personal belief is they're very much not dead. They are very much more important than ever. And there is a backlash, though. So there is a backlash against history, against Black history. And it's more important than ever that we acknowledge and participate in this month's celebrations. There's an association called the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, or ASALH. They establish a theme for Black History Month every year, and the theme for this year is African Americans and labor. So, we're going to talk a bit today about one specific type of workforce labor. So, that's to say, employment in corporate, nonprofit, higher ed, the like spaces. And so, I want to start off by just having you reflect a little bit to yourselves about what you think might be barriers that you've witnessed or that you believe may negatively impact the Black employee experience in the workplace. And so this is our first interactive poll. I just put that up on the screen. And so again, if anyone's not familiar with Slido, the way that this tool works is that you can use a device that can grab the QR code and go ahead and scan that QR code. It'll take you to a screen where you can put in your answers. If you're not able to use a device that's generating or able to scan, you can also go directly to slido.com and use the code 3807716. And so, as you can see, as folks start to get into this, we'll start to see answers pop up. If for some reason technology is just not on your side today, you can always use the chat, whether that's publicly or privately, and send us messages in the chat. So I'm starting to see some answers come through. So as they come through, I'll start to name them. But once again, just in case anyone's not able to see this, or if you're not able to engage, the question is, what barriers have you witnessed or do you believe negatively impact the Black employee experience in the workplace? And so we've got some answers coming through here. So we've got white fragility, wage inequality, tone policing, stereotyping, microaggressions, biases, lack of diversity, lack of understanding, isolation, a lot of plus ones for white fragility, microaggressions, biases, being excluded, not having access to sponsorship or a lack of sponsorship, tokenism. Preconceived notions. Yeah, there's pet threat. That's an interesting one. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, whoever shared that one. I also like this tool as a side note just because it is anonymous. And so for some of us, we may not feel comfortable adding our names to some of these answers, which is totally fine. So um, please feel free to keep typing away if you're still thinking through on your end. But yes, there are a lot of barriers. There's a lot of stuff that we have to deal with that I should say that Black employees have to deal with in particular. And a lot of this has to do with, again, identities, our history, how folks have been perceived through the last several generations, and how this all plays out in the workplace, which is its own unique sort of microcosm of our larger society. And so there are a lot of barriers that have been in place even before this year. And so I'm not discounting any of those, but I think especially in this year, we have even more barriers because there are a lot of policies that are impacting Black employees that are in action right now, and that we're still figuring out what those might mean for us or what they may even be. So there's immigration policies that might be impacting folks. There's government reform. There is many people who've lost roles within the federal agencies because they've been reduced in their force. There's social policies. So thinking through how the US is looking to uphold traditional gender definitions. And we know that especially Black transgender women are some of the most impacted and oppressed peoples out there. Um, there are challenges around environmental regulations. So there's just a lot of challenges across the board, but especially within the workplace, some of these challenges start to get a little bit more granular and nuanced. And so, as we can see here, it's a lot of maybe communication, interpersonal interactions, things like that. So I see there's one person still typing. We'll take another maybe 30 seconds to type in here, and then I'm going to move on to our next point. But the reason I'm starting off here is to just sort of set the stage, is that there are a lot of challenges that are in existence through no fault of anyone's in terms of Black employees in the workplace. There's policing of time and effort, cement ceilings, aggressive interactions by colleagues. There's a lot going on within the workplace. So let's talk a little bit about some of these topics that have come up already. So race, racism, and microaggressions in particular. Now, I'm going to talk a bit deeper about each of these, but I want to start with this quote from Ta-Nehisi Coates, which I really love, which is, "Race is the child of racism, not the father." So if we're going to understand why Black employees as a racial group are experiencing inequitable workplaces, we have to remind ourselves that historically, Black people in this country were disregarded as full humans due to our existing structure of racism. So if we start with race, race is a created set of categories based on arbitrary physical attributes such as skin color, hair color, texture, facial features, other physical features. And this has all come together to become what it is now to justify a hierarchy of peoples. Racism is the marginalization and or oppression of people of color, Black people, based on a socially constructed racial hierarchy that privileges white people. And I want to note that race wasn't really a well-known or widely used concept before we had this system of racism. Finally, microaggressions are the brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional. And I always like to emphasize that point. It doesn't always matter whether you mean them or not, they still exist and have impact. That communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative slights and insults to a target person or group. And this could be because of race, it could also be because of gender identity or role expression, sexual orientation, religion, age, a whole host of other identities as well. Now, how are microaggressions and racism connected? Microaggressions are considered acts of racism or discrimination. Now that we have this kind of grounded foundation of terminology, I want to talk a bit about how racism and racial inequities in the workplace impact Black employees. Now, in terms of what you've all shared so far, I'm going to take a moment and I'm just going to start sharing a couple data points with you to highlight a few different ways that historical and structural racism continues to manifest in today's workplace. And you'll note that as I pull up some of these data points, I always try to get as much current data as possible, but we're still in this space of we're waiting for some of the previous year's data to come through, and also we're actually actively losing some of our data points. So I've tried my best to come up with as recent data points as possible. But first, we have Black people are overrepresented in essential jobs and on average paid less. Next point I want to make is that Black employees who engage in self-promotion, so those are things that you think about in the workplace, you're always told, put yourself forward, ask for that raise, put your hand up for that promotion. They tend to be rated less favorably on job performance and person organization fit measures. So it's kind of a backlash that's not anyone's fault, but is how Black employees are perceived in the workplace. In 2023, only six Black professionals held CEO positions at Fortune 500 companies, and only 4% of senior leaders at large companies were Black. The unemployment rate for Black Americans is the highest of any racial or ethnic group, and it's roughly double the rate for the US overall. Black workers are the most likely to say that they have experienced discrimination at work because of their race or ethnicity. And finally, Black employees report that their managers manage with excessive control or attention to details. And I think a lot of these data points are borne out by all of your sharings earlier so far. Now, I'm not sharing this to really kind of put us in a state of gloom and doom, but I really just want to be very candid about the realities of the Black employee experience in the workplace. So there's another thing I want to talk about too, and this is something called emotional tax. Now, has anyone heard of this phrase before? Put a plus or a one in the chat if you've heard of this phrase. And if you want to share what you think about this phrase, also please feel to put some thoughts in the chat. But if you haven't heard of this phrase before, if it's something that it's a bit newer to you, you can put a dash or a zero in the chat and let me know, or a simple wire and also works as well. All right, so we've got some pluses coming through. Okay, we got one or two zeros, one or two no's, but a lot of pluses. So this will be a refresher for those of you who are adding the pluses in, but for those of you who have not heard what this term means, or if you've not heard this at all, here's what this term refers to. So this is the definition of emotional tax. The emotional tax, also known as Black tax, if it's referring specifically to Black people issues, is the heightened experience of being treated differently from peers due to their race or ethnicity or gender, triggering adverse effects on health and feelings of isolation and making it difficult to thrive at work. Now, coping with discrimination creates this burden of this emotional tax in the workplace. And what we see is that nearly 60% of women and men who are Black have experienced this burden, according to a survey by Catalyst. And the issue is that when employees, no matter what your background is, if we don't feel like our perspectives are welcomed or included, or even if it's not even our perspective, if we don't feel like we are welcomed and included in a space like work, not only will we suffer, but the company's bottom line will suffer too. Now, I don't like to default to business case for why we should do things that are right and good, but if that's the way that we have to push for change, that's one aspect. And here's some other impacts that we see coming up. So there are increased cortisol levels, and I'll talk more about this in a bit. But when we're constantly experiencing stress in our workplace due to structural, interpersonal, or internalized racism, our bodies release something called cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And it's okay for this hormone to be released occasionally, but if it's constantly being released, that is going to lead to a significant problem from a health perspective, which can lead to various different health issues and comorbidities. This deepens our intersectional oppression. What I mean by that is that Black people are not necessarily just one singular identity. They have other identities. And so if we happen to have different marginalized identities, so for example, let's say that we have someone who's in your workplace who is a Black Muslim queer woman who has a disability, that would then create multiple impacts of bias, discrimination, microaggressions, and the like. Suppression of identity and expression. So if we've been socially deemed less than, many Black people are then rightfully cautious about expressing themselves fully or bringing their whole selves to work because they've seen that that has not always been accepted or it's not always been seen as professional. So thinking about how we talk, what kind of hairstyles you might choose to wear in the workplace or that are even acceptable in the workplace, clothing that you're wearing, all sorts of different ways that this comes up where we might tamp that down or feel like we have to put it aside. There's a wide chasm between the front and backside. What I mean by that is, as a result of suppression, when suppression is continued and practiced for a while, we start to create this internal divide where the front side is what we allow to be shared, what we allow to be seen, and the backside is what we hide or what we choose to put away. So As an example, extensive code switching is one way that how we can sort of widen these different places and spaces that we show up in. There's a threat to generational wealth, and so difference in treatment results in this feeling of being taxed because of skin color, but also it can refer to the firsts of Black families. So, first to graduate, first to make six figures. People may be expected to take care of their families, so it becomes even more challenging for Black families to build generational wealth, in addition to some of these other issues as well. Burnout is probably pretty self-explanatory at this point, and lack of safety the same. And finally, deprivation of a fundamental human need, which is belonging. So ultimately, Black people have been consistently over the last several generations been made to feel like they don't belong in society. And as a result, that trickles into the workplace, especially as the data shows us in management and leadership roles. Now, a lot of times we're looking at Black folks and talking about, okay, well, we have to be resilient or we have to just make it through. And the issue with too much resilience is that while we're defining it, the definition is resilience is defined as a psychological ability to cope and adapt with stress and bounce back or forward from negative occurrences. And this is a desirable trait, but this is not necessarily what we're always aiming for. And so I'm going to read a passage to you, which is from Dr. Robin Hughes, the Dean of School of Education at Southern Illinois University. And what she says is, while we're supposed to be so darn resilient on the one hand, on the other, our intellect is second guessed as leaders, thinkers, students, and teachers. Many of us grew up hearing that you must be twice as good to move in these streets. Couple that with resilience and all the other superpowers, and there you have one life that is in no way sustainable for any length of time. When we keep telling ourselves to be resilient, or when we tell Black employees to be resilient because that's just the way the system is, we're also saying you're going to have to live an unsustainable life. And there's not much we can do about that. Now, I don't know about you, but that's not the kind of world that I want to live in. So, while resilience can be a great trait and it can be helpful and valuable in a lot of different cases, it's not something that we should default to as this is just the way it is, suck it up and deal with it. So, how can we move the needle and shift the narrative a little bit? Let's talk a bit now about how we can think about strategically building inclusive workplaces so that we can lessen the impact of some of what I've just talked about. Now, before I share some of my thoughts and my suggestions on what kinds of actions we can take to support change and support greater support in the workplace, I would like to co-create with you all a space about what could be possible in our workplaces based on what we've covered so far. So, whether or not you identify as Black, we're each here, I think, because we care or we want to learn or we want to know what can we do more. So let's take a moment and I want you to think to yourself, what can I, or what can we, or what can my team, my company, my organization, my neighborhood, my country, whatever you want to fill in the blank there, what can we do to transform the Black employee experience positively? And if you're here in this webinar and you are Black, maybe there's some things that you've seen work really well and you can share those in the Slido as well. So once again, in case anyone's not able to get into Slido, the code is 3807716. And as always, you can always share it in the chat publicly or privately if you don't wish or you're not able to engage with the Slido. So I see some people typing away, so we'll see what comes through. And I'll also note that this webinar is being recorded and we will send out a compilation of all of these sharings afterwards. So if you're seeing anything that feels or sounds really good to you, feel free to take notes, but we'll also send this along afterwards so that you have this as another resource for yourself. Okay, so we got some comments coming through here. So stop ignoring my experiences in the workplace. Educate coworkers about microaggressions. Thanks for the edit. Whoever this was, stop ignoring and or denying my harmful experiences in the workplace. Take that for sure. Hire more Black board members and C-suite executives. Allies need to have the difficult conversations. Intervene when issues happen. And I think a lot of what we're seeing so far aligns with what we've seen with the challenges and the barriers that we see in existence, right? Hold our coworkers, hold our clients accountable. Yeah, we just did a whole webinar on accountability last month. So definitely a topic that is important and top of mind. Employ more Black staff. Yes, hire more Black people. Listen to Black employees. Listen, co-create. How can we improve employee experience? And I love that comment because we can't always know what we need. We have to co-create. We have to ask. We have to bring people in and make it a collaborative experience, not just what we're telling somebody what we think they need best. Let's see what else we have here. Become an advocate for those who can't or won't speak up. Absolutely. Again, based on everything we've just shared, especially what I've just shared around emotional tax and resilience and the impact of that, sometimes there are folks who are like, you know what? I'm done. I'm tapped out. I don't have anything left to give. It's not my problem to fix anymore. So, you know what? That's where us as allies can lean in and be advocates and do the work for those who can't or won't be able to engage for whatever reasons. And there's no judgment there at all. Unpack culture and fit. Don't penalize Black people who don't want to share their personal lives. We're not unfriendly or hostile. This is a job. Heard. Yes. There's been so much discussion over the last 5 years, especially with the switch to more remote work and hybrid work with the onset of COVID around bring your whole selves to work. You're watching this webinar now and you're able to see the room that I'm sitting in my home. There's this blurring of public and private. And so there's this desire sometimes to tell people, we want to know everything about you. We want you to share everything. And you know what? At the end of the day, a lot of times it's a job. And we talk a lot at Inclusion Geeks about how work is not your family. And I think that's true. And while we can be supportive and we can be friends and we can be allies and support each other and work together well, at the end of the day, these are jobs that we're talking about. All right, let's see what else we have here. Intervene, support, hold accountability, prioritize education, commit to dismantling anti-Black racism outside of Black History Month, MLK Day, Juneteenth. Consistency is key. Absolutely. I love that point, and I'm going to hit on that just a bit more because while February is Black History Month and there's different reasons for that, it's also or it is the shortest month in our year. And this is not the way to think about how to do all this work just in February. It should be consistent work that is happening all throughout the year. And we have these days like Juneteenth and Martin Luther King Day to highlight and really focus. But that doesn't mean that those are the only times that we should be thinking, talking, attending educational webinars like this one, doing the work. It should be year round all the time. Anti-racist training should be mandatory for all staff. Yes, you know, we can have a whole other webinar about the state of training in today's world, especially here in the US, but I would plus one that myself personally. Stop asking for extra labor, especially when it's to make up for the mediocrity of white colleagues who get paid more. Analyze, what do we consider to be professionalism? Yeah, I love that one because sometimes those kinds of critical thinking really help us unpack the sort of hidden biases or the unstated rules that we have built into our systems and our workplaces. For example, it may not be easy to see me right now, but I am a short brown woman. I have curly hair, and I was taught as a biracial woman growing up that to be more quote unquote professional when I was going to interviews or going to a new job or meeting people at networking events, that I should straighten my hair so that my straight hair would be more professional and less wild or crazy. And so, again, there's a lot more to unpack there, but unpacking why do we think something's professional or not? How are we thinking about how folks are showing up in terms of the tone of their voice, the clothing, the way that we act and speak, and all of those different things. Let's see what else we have here. Update the concept of professional dress to be more inclusive, less white focused on in terms of styles of hair, jewelry, etc. Absolutely. Lots of good stuff to unpack here. So again, if you're still thinking and typing through, keep it going, but I think these are some great points. I have some points as well, and I'm going to go through. I see, oh, there's one more person typing. We'll let this person type through, and then we'll move to some of my ideas. Objective KPIs. I would love this person to share more on what you're thinking through with that. But yes, again, thinking through, there's a lot to think about when we're talking specifically about the workplace space. Now, I could also have asked you this question about what can we do in general, whether that's in your community, in your neighborhood, in your hometown, in the United States, outside the United States. So there's a lot more to think about with this kind of question, but these are really specific workplace angles that we can be thinking through because that's the space that I think we all have in common is that we're all working in some kind of space together. So I have some other thoughts too. And see, one more person is typing. We'll let you finish up and then I'll go through to share additional tips. This is the benefit and the downside of Slido. You can see when people are typing, and so I want to make sure we hold space for that. Oh, I think someone's finished. All right, so let's keep going. All right. So if you are a Black person and you are trying to think about, yes, I would like my workplace to be equitable, to be affirming, here are some things for you to keep in mind. So, first, remember, you are not your job. It's not your job. It's not your role to save or to fix your organization. Keep and show your receipts. Now, what I mean by that is, again, we've already established there is a lot going on at different workplaces. And sometimes what happens when we see prevalence of microaggressions or toxic culture, toxic employees, colleagues, whatever it might be, one of the impacts of that is we start to doubt ourselves or we're told literally that didn't happen, they didn't mean it this way. So keep your documentation, lean on others for support if you need it, but have that evidence to back yourself up. Ask for resources, ask for support, give feedback. So we're not in this alone. And even if you do not feel like you have support within your organization, there are spaces like this one that we are co-creating here today. There are other spaces and other communities to lean on as well. And so one thing that I have really been thinking a lot about lately, just as a person in this world, is that I find it really easy to offer solutions and help to other people but really hard. It's challenging for me personally to ask for help. And that may be true for some of you as well. So thinking about how can we ask when we need that support and not suffer through on our own? And also how can we identify folks who can be those supports for us? So, with that in mind, build and leverage your network and your community. That could be an affinity group if you have access to that at your workplace. It could be a mentor within or outside of your organization. It could be more informal support networks. There's communities that are active on LinkedIn, for example, or on different social media platforms, or that are in person in terms of the neighborhoods or the communities that we live in. So there's a lot of other spaces to think about where is your community and how can you make those connections and leverage those. And make sure that you're establishing your boundaries and prioritizing self-care. I think self-care sometimes gets kind of shoved to the side as, just taking bubble baths. But self-care is a very real tactic that we can use to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves mentally and physically. And it's beyond just taking a break or taking a bath. It's a real approach where you're holding space for yourself. Now, if you are someone who is an ally, whether that's, the position you're in, or if it's a self-identified label that you have taken on, or if it's a role that you are working towards, here's what we can think about as we're thinking through how can we create and work towards a racially equitable and affirming workplace. So first, really interrogate and release your ideologies of Black inferiority as well as white superiority and any physiological myths. And what I mean by that is just like we unpacked just a few minutes ago, unpack any kinds of messaging that you can identify within yourself around how people show up in terms of their race in the workplace and what kind of preconceived notions or messages you may have internalized or been socialized to believe, and really interrogate and release some of those messages that we know are not true. They're just what we've been taught because of the society that we live in. Be transparent about pay, benefits, promotion structures. This is really great if you're in a managerial role in particular. So a lot of times as managers, we kind of get caught up because it's a lot of work. we're supporting our employees, we're trying to grow them, we're sometimes doing the work of an individual contributor as well. And we forget that there can be this level of transparency and openness and vulnerability because for some of us, depending on our industry, the work that we're doing, the team, the culture, we're taught, whether explicitly or implicitly, to sort of hide away some of this information. And so be really clear and work as an ally if you're growing some of your employees who are Black as well, and let them know what the process is, what the opportunities are. Speak their name in rooms that they're not present in. Give Black employees, especially leaders, the support and resources needed to succeed and create real change. This is a really important point because I think what we've seen in the last few years, especially in the US, is that with the rise of greater awareness and willingness to work on issues around race and racism and anti-racism and social justice, we've seen a lot of Black employees in particular being put into positions as a DEI officer or in HR positions, people officer, chief DEI, whatever title it might be. But those positions are not always followed up with support or resources. There's no budget, there's no support. These roles are not rolling up directly into C-suite or at the CEO level. And so essentially, they get set up to fail in a lot of ways. And so if you're in a position where you're able to think about that structure or how these leadership positions are funded and supported and where they are placed in the organizational hierarchy, really make sure that you're not, whether it's intentional or unintentional, setting people up to fail. If there are manifestations of racial bias, microaggressions, again, that idea of what is professional or not, really unpack that, interrogate that, unpack that, and confront it. Make sure that we're not letting it slide. And don't treat Black people as a monolith. What I mean by that is that there is a wide range of experiences and identity groups within that umbrella of Black. And so, again, for those of us who are based in the United States, we sometimes default to thinking, oh, everyone who is here is African American or is somebody whose family has come here because of slavery. And that's not always true because we have people who are Black from all over the world, and there are different experiences. There's different languages, there's different cultural backgrounds, there's different religious observances. And so, really make sure that you're remembering that when you're talking and thinking about how you're supporting your people within that workplace environment. Now, finally, to kind of zoom out a little bit to the organizational level. So, a couple of final thoughts and tips. Go beyond performative and surface level events and initiatives. Now, what I mean by that is, like we said earlier, brought this up. February is Black History Month. Your organization may or may not have a recognizing of that, which is great if they do, and I fully support that. But a lot of times, these identity months, these history months, or these recognitions or events tend to become, whether it's intentional or unintentional, more performative and sort of check the box. So it's like, okay, it's February, let's get a speaker in, let's do a lunch and learn, let's maybe donate money, whatever it might be. And then that's kind of a one and done. So March comes along and no one's thinking you're talking about this stuff. So we have to make sure that as an organization, if you're really committed to supporting greater equity within your workplace, it's got to be baked in and it's got to be consistent and year round and not just a one-time deal or a once a year type of approach. Make sure that public support for Black lives is visible within your organization. Now, this is also going to come down to things like what kind of statements are you making? How is your organization reacting to things that are happening at the societal level? How is your organization supporting Black employees? There could be extreme cases where perhaps a Black employee is being targeted or threatened. We're seeing a lot of this happening in the federal space right now. And so making sure that you're publicly supporting your employees as well as privately supporting them too. Thinking about your policies and your procedures, make sure that you're reviewing and auditing them. I like to say this should be a regular basis, so it could be quarterly, annually, whatever that cadence is, but make sure that you're reviewing what your policies are with a lens that's kind of looking through for all of these things. We're making sure it's not racist, that it's actively anti-racist, that we're not baking in bias into how our processes are constructed. Partner with other organizations that have shared values. This is great if you're able to think about you're making choices in terms of who are you working with, who are your vendors, who are your suppliers, who are the folks that you're bringing in for training and education, who are you partnering with to provide food in the cafeteria. It could be all sorts of different angles, right? But making sure that you're partnering with other organizations that live up to your values and your organizational stated values, especially around these topics. And provide opportunities for rest and paid time off because, again, the racism impacts a lot of different angles. It's not just about missed opportunities or hitting that cement ceiling or that glass ceiling or whatever that material ceiling is made of. It has that real health impact as well. And so make sure that you're giving your Black employees and really all of your employees opportunities to take rest and to make sure that if things are happening, especially in the larger world that may be impacting your Black employees, that you're understanding and flexible around that, and you're not expecting folks to just show up every day, business as usual, because especially in these days, it's a bit more tumultuous than we have been used to in a while. All right, so I have a couple more practical steps and then we'll have some time for some Q&A. So if you do have some questions, start thinking about them and then we'll have some time at the end to go through. But I want to talk really quickly about some steps to just get a bit more granular and practical. So I want to start with taking a trauma-informed approach. And so just to start off with, let's establish a clear understanding of what trauma is. So trauma can be defined as an emotional response to a distressing or disturbing event that overwhelms someone's ability to cope. And trauma can manifest in various different forms, and it can come from a wide range of different experiences, including but not limited to national disasters, violence, accidents, loss, grief, systemic oppression. I don't know about you, but a lot of that stuff comes up pretty regularly these days. And so each individual's response to what is trauma or what could be trauma for them is going to vary based on who we are, our unique circumstances, our resilience factors. And so some common signs and symptoms of trauma in the workplace could include changes in behavior, that could be increased irritability, withdrawing, difficulty concentrating, fatigue, having headaches, stomach problems, depression, anxiety, just not being able to engage on an interpersonal level the way that maybe folks have been used to in the past, reduced productivity. And again, these signs and symptoms vary from person to person. So it's really important to make sure that we're approaching each situation with empathy and understanding. And what I mean by a trauma-informed approach is it's a way for us, especially if you're in a managerial or support role, where you're emphasizing empathy, safety, and collaboration. And it's really just recognizing at the end of the day that we are all people and we're working with people. And it's operating from a place of care and respect for our common humanity. So here's a couple ways that we can do this in practice, especially if you're managing a team and you want to think about prioritizing people over productivity. So first, listen and validate. So check-ins. Check-ins are great. I love a good check-in. Do it proactively. Don't wait for someone to ask or tell you that they need support or have to come to you first. Don't center yourself. It's not all about you. So if someone's sharing something with you and you're like, oh, I also experienced something similar, maybe you just wait on that for a little bit or put it to the side. It's about supporting the person in front of you, not bringing yourself always into that conversation as well. And don't ignore or minimize pain and stress, especially if you are not experiencing that yourself. And this is tough because if we're not ourselves actively being impacted, it can be hard sometimes to appreciate what is happening or what someone is feeling. So don't minimize what someone else is feeling, especially if you don't really understand it. That's okay. You don't have to understand it to be able to support. You want to focus on flexibility and psychological safety. So during times of upheaval, stress, racial trauma, adjust the expectations. adjust the workload. Maybe the deadline can be pushed out a little bit. Maybe we can take a pause on something. Maybe we can take a break for a day, whatever it might look like for you. But thinking about how can we be flexible instead of just being like, all right, 9 to 5, everyone's here, get that project into me. Don't ask Black people to teach or to educate yourself or your colleagues if you're not Black. Make sure that Black employees are not bearing the extra burden of educating other people. And then finally, advocate and support. So push back on policies that you see or that you're told are going to disproportionately impact your Black employees. Make a public statement of support and care, as well as private statements, of course, and address microaggressions, macroaggressions, and biases. Don't let them fester, especially if that's something that's common in your culture already. Okay, so I've shared a lot with you, and I would love to open things up for Q&A. I have some questions that have been previously submitted, so I'm happy to start with those. But if anyone has a question right now, I'll take a pause and see if anyone would like to come off mute. Please feel to use the raise hand feature in Zoom. Or if you'd like to share a question in chat, please feel free to go ahead and share at this point. So I'll take a beat. All right, I'm not seeing any immediate hands go up, so I'll take a quick look through some of the pre-submitted questions, and then I do have some final thoughts and some reflection questions to go through. So if we don't have any burning questions right now, we'll keep moving on. But if you're typing or thinking away, keep doing that and go ahead. All right, so there's a couple questions that we got in advance, and so people were asking, would love to know what we think people, individuals can do or have done to create a more inclusive workplace, even if the company is not creating the initiative. For example, someone where this person worked came up with an idea for everyone to wear a rainbow sticker on their badge to affirm that they were an LGBTQIA friendly workplace, and that idea caught on. Okay, so I think for this topic and what we can do is even if your company is not actively doing anything in particular or they're not focusing on this, they have no initiatives, there's no budget, there's no action that's being taken, we still have agency as our own selves as individuals. And so this is where you see there can be this sort of bottoms up work in addition to top down work. In an ideal workplace, every single level will be focusing and thinking about these topics, but it's not always the reality for a wide range of factors. So, what I would say is that if you are in a workplace or in an environment where it's not something that your company, your organization cares about, is thinking about. They may not feel like they're able to. You can be doing things like some of these tips that we've talked about already. So you can be making sure that you're doing your own work, that you're educating yourself, that you're staying on top of what is in the news, that you are interrogating your own actions, your reactions, how you're talking and thinking about your fellow employees, especially your fellow Black employees, and thinking about how is race brought up or experienced in the workplace. You could, if you had this kind of relationship with your Black colleagues, ask them to share more, but I'd caution that because I just want to again name that people may not want to share, and that's completely fine and that's okay. But for some of you, you may have solid relationships or friendly relationships, and you may be able to have more of these discussions. So again, kind of take that with however your personal circumstance might look like. But again, it could also be uh, sharing information. So if you have a Slack, for example, a company Slack, you could post in a general channel and say, it's Black History Month. Here's what I'm doing to recognize this month. I just want to say there's a lot of different little ways to show support and kind of continue this work, but I would just add an extra note of caution because I just want to name that in today's world, a lot of these activities are a bit more heightened or dangerous than they may have been in previous years. And so do what you feel is right and is comfortable for you. And if nothing else, there is always internal work that we can continuously be doing. As someone who's been doing this kind of work for over 10 years now, I am still continuously learning. I am absorbing information. I am looking back on what I've done in the past. I'm thinking forward to what I'm doing in the future. I'm trying to check myself. I'm trying to hear from new voices. So there's a lot of ways that you can just continuously educate yourself, and that's going to naturally kind of bleed into your environment as well. All right, so I'll take another quick pause. I don't see any hands raised still, so I'll go to the next question that we got in advance. So this person asked a big question, which is, in this current climate, what is next for race in the workplace? Hmm, I don't know. And that's where I'll say, like, I wish I had all the answers. This is something I always say to my private clients. I say, if I had all the answers, I would just give them to you, and then we'd all have more time back in our day. This is a question where I don't really know, to be quite frank, and I imagine that a lot of you don't know either, and that's maybe partially why you're here. What I do know is that race is becoming very politicized, and we are, especially in the US, we are entering a state where it feels like a lot of stuff is up in the air. Not even it feels, there are a lot of things up in the air, and we are in an active period of transition and change. And I think there's definitely a backlash that we are experiencing from the height of, I guess, um, post-COVID, post George Floyd's murder in, 2020, 2021, when a lot of organizations and people were really locked in and focused on talking and thinking and learning about these topics and implementing change in the workplace. So I think that what we're going to be seeing in the future, this year and ongoing, is we're going to be seeing a lot of backlash, continued backlash. And I think that it's going to be more important than ever for us to actively come together in community like we're doing right now, to come together in learning, and supporting each other, and making sure that we are not just going to let things slide backwards, because that feels like where we are right now. So if other people have thoughts, please welcome some sharing. So let me know if you have thoughts as well, share in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself. But yeah, I think it's a tricky time, to say the least. And then the last question that I have in advance was, how can we continue to have these crucial conversations in this divisive political climate? Again, it's going to be, I think, really a case by case situation. For some organizations, there is a real definitive lockdown and elimination of any kind of discussion around these topics. For other organizations, that's not true. I'm curious about all of your organizations and what that looks like for each of you. But I also recognize that there's an additional safety factor that is now kind of nuancing a lot of our conversation. So again, I think just whether it's a personal private space, like with your family or with close friends or your community, whether it's workplace spaces like an affinity space, or your company at large, or your team, just be really looking to continue to see where can we continue to push this conversation forward. And that's really going to come down to where each of us has influence, what our relationships look like, what our spheres of influence look like. And that's a concept we talk a lot about here at Inclusion Geeks, which is our spheres of influence. And I don't have the image handy today, but I'm happy to share it out after. But basically, you can think about, we each have influence in some ways. And so it could be at the center of the sphere of influence framework. It's just ourselves, it's us. And so we have a lot of control over that. And so we can continue to have these conversations. We can come to these kinds of webinars like you're here today. We can talk with people, we can learn, we can educate ourselves. And then as we kind of continue to go out, our next sphere of influence might be our close friends and family. It could be our close team members. If you're a manager, maybe it's the team that you're managing, or it's trusted work colleagues or people who are in your department. If we keep going out further, it might be the people at your entire organization, depending on size and what that looks like. It could be on a personal level, it could be people in your community, the neighborhood that you live in, the city that you live in, or the geographical area that you live in. And then again, we can just kind of keep going out and out and out. But at every stage, we have some kind of influence. It might be really minimal, it might be a lot, but thinking about what does that look like for you? Because each of us, it's going to look different. And so I would say just really commit to continuing these conversations in some format, because I think it's more important than ever. So I'm not seeing any other questions come through. If you do have questions, put them through, type them through, but I'd like to just maybe start wrapping up with having you all think about one last question from me for you, which is, what's one action that you're going to take after we finish our discussion today in a couple minutes. And so the last slider that we have, what's one action that you're going to take after today's discussion? And if folks are like, I've got a lot to think about, Felicia, I can't type this out right now, totally fine. I'll leave this up for a few moments and see if anyone has any thoughts. But as we're kind of starting to conclude, just a few, I'm going to speak through a few final reflection questions as people are typing, and I'll pop this slide up once I'm done speaking and once we see some answers coming through. But some final ways that you can think about pulling all of this information together. You can start thinking to yourself, how are Black people experiencing the workplace culture at your organization? Or if you are yourself Black, how are you experiencing the workplace on a day-to-day basis? That's going to give us a lot of information to tie back to all the things we've talked about. Who has control? Who has influence, as we've just talked about, over the decisions that are being made? What kind of education or resources about race, racism, oppression are provided to us? Or what is out there that maybe is not provided to us that we can have more access to? How can we collectively come together to work to address issues, whether that's internal, external, or both, that are impacting Black people? And what kind of audits or processes or reviews do we have in place, if any? So those are some kind of meaty reflection questions for you all to leave here thinking through. Now, I see some stuff coming through, so I'm going to start speaking through. So, what's one action we'll take after today's discussion? As a Black woman, I am choosing rest. I'm tired. Yes. As we echo in the chat, we see you, we feel that, and please rest. As a quick side shout out, I'm sure this person is aware of this resource already, but if anyone's not, check out the Nap Ministry. It's an amazing resource for you, especially for Black people who are like, I am tired. I feel that. Review your policies. Yes, review policies. It sounds so unsexy and boring, but it's really important. It's something that's really critical and can be really impactful in the long term. Listen better. Take action. Yes, because it's not just about listening or having a conversation. It's about moving to the action piece after that. I will speak up when I see inequity, even if I experience job loss. I'm really holding space for that comment. It's so powerful. I choose only equitable spaces to work and give my business to. Yes, we have power in our dollars, where we show up, where we engage, and it is a real fear that there may be job loss, and it's a scary time. But I really sending love to this person for that comment. Hold myself and others accountable for their biases. Yes, again, uh, sounds kind of sure, whatever, but it's important and it can be really hard. And it can be almost even hardest to do it for yourself versus someone else. Let's see, what else do we have here? Continue to educate myself, make a point to take action, speak up, share this knowledge gained from this session with my colleagues. Oh, thank you for that. Yes, and again, as I mentioned earlier, we will be sharing out this recording and all these resources with folks afterwards. So if you want to share more information, you will have this available to share with your colleagues. So we are just at time now. So for anyone who needs to hop, thank you so much for being here.